Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest. I've lost count actually, so I don't know which episode this is, but the latest episode of Breaking the Silence, the conversations. As I've said before, we're looking for sort of recorded, relaxed conversations, no frills, recorded in my kids' playroom. So that's how it is. So it brings me great pleasure. We've had a really interesting pre-record chat this morning. Victoria Embley is our guest today.
Hello.
She's had a varied career, both as a full-time mom, but then working in arenas which I'll let her explain, involving lots of analytics, business structure, IT, etc. But one of the main reasons really for this conversation is a normal punter, I'm going to say it that way, a normal punter's view of the COVID era, having been, as we call in the trade, asleep, well, not asleep, but not awake to the
Unaware.
awareness. Yeah, exactly. And so this awakening process and some of the things that led to that from a member of the public. But Victoria, welcome to the podcast. If you could just sort of introduce yourself to the viewers and shed some more light on some of the sort of career things that you've done over your life.
Yeah, no worries. So, my name's Victoria. I've got two lovely daughters, 17 and 18. Prior to having them, I've worked in various industries from pharmaceuticals for a year. That was the last job I had actually before falling pregnant with my daughter. I've worked in construction, in retail, in FMCG, consultancy, yeah, defense as well, Ministry of Defense for a while. Yeah, doing a lot of analysis and within the financial arena, really. Um, and my last job at GE Healthcare, which was a fixed term contract for a year, was the last sort of paid job that I had before giving up my work to be with my children for sort of 13, 14 years as a full-time mum, which I was very privileged to be able to do that, because I know there's a lot of mums that would love to be able to do that and not in the position to be able to do it. So yeah, so I did that for a while, and I suppose, going down to, what happened in 2020, I suppose I started um, getting awarenesses around different things when my daughter reached 12 years old, and they wanted to give her the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer. And there was just this little thought in my mind that was like, well, why does she need a jab at 12 years old for cervical cancer? I never did. And as I started to look into things, somebody told me about a quarterly publication called The Informed Parent. And I was quite aghast at what I read in that, but never really connected the dots at that point. But I was reading articles from doctors about viruses that had been created, and also the fact that because big pharmaceuticals they'd got such a financial power that they were no longer able to write objective studies anymore unless it supported what big pharmaceutical said. So anyway, I was able to, get my daughter to avoid that jab, um, and um, and then later on, which is the work that I'm in now, which we'll talk about later, which is more mental health, which my partner's just been awarded a doctorate for, because it really works. Yeah, it was then we came to 2020, which was a very eye-opening time for, I know yourself, for many other medical professionals and for many other people in jobs and everyday life, which was quite a shock for me. It was quite a journey, as you know.
So how did that journey begin? All journeys have a beginning point. For you, what was the take us? I mean, I try not to think too much about 2020 and
Yeah.
that time. It's kind of deleted from memory, really, PTSD. But what were you sort of your first inclinations about the sort of discrepancies between what you were seeing and what you were perhaps seeing on the TV or hearing on the grapevine?
It was the censorship that I first witnessed. And I like to use this as a little analogy, if I may, first of all. And I use this a lot with people. And I say, so imagine walking down your street where you live. If you were always looking to the right, would you notice what was going on the left-hand side? And they obviously say no. I said, so what would happen if I was walking down that same street and I was looking to the left and saw something completely different to you? So that's how I kind of position it initially, that different people witness different things. And honestly, I do not even know how some of these things ended up on my social media. I don't know how they ended up there, how I even saw them. But one of the most distressing videos was of an American medical professional. I can't remember his name. I don't even remember what job he had, but he was speaking about the dangers of the mRNA gene therapy. And he was upset, quite rightly. He was angry, quite rightly, and was asking questions like, how are they not paying attention to what happened in the trials? And I can remember what he said. And he said 22% ended up with neurological damage, 50% ended up infertile. I don't want to say the last statement that he did, because the last thing I want to do is cause distress for anyone that's already taken something, because words are very, very powerful on someone's mindset. And I believe the mind is very powerful, coupled with the right healing capacities, that we can heal from anything. That's my belief. And so he was the first one. Professor Dolores Cahill was the next lady that we witnessed a lot of censorship. There was the Great Barrington Declaration, which you've probably heard around as well, thousands of scientists. And what was concerning, people might think, we have to really explore it, because these videos were being taken down very, very quickly. And so if they're being taken down very quickly, that tells us that there's a whole infrastructure in place of people ready and technology there to listen for certain algorithms, I suppose, for these videos to just completely disappear. And for me, science is the very essence of democracy and the very essence of science. Not that I'm an academic, David, because I'm not. I came out, although I was intelligent at school, I didn't have a very strong belief system in myself, so I came out with very little. But for me, logically, it tells us that, there's no black or white answer. We should have debate, and we should have open debate. And by shutting someone's voice down doesn't mean that what they've got to say is wrong. It just means that whoever's shutting it down doesn't want people to hear what they have to say. So that was very, very alarming for me. And I have to say, I was in a frantic space. I was very emotional. People probably would have said I had some mental health problem at the time, but it scared me. It
Were you
really,
being censored yourself, Victoria? Were you censored
sorry.
yourself with your own output on social media? Were you being censored yourself?
Yes, I was, because I saw also the lovely Claire Wills Harrison, who was a solicitor, and she was having whistleblowers from the care homes speak to her about the DNARs that were just being put on everybody, and that it meant that the people in the care homes were having nil by mouth, were being refused certain treatments, doctors weren't going in, and they were put on these protocols, which meant that they died. But she was censored very, very quickly. And of course, my sister then told me, and I had other people, other friends who'd got parents in care homes that were telling me that they were seeing the same thing. Um, and I was very vocal on Facebook, despite my own anxieties. I wanted people to hear it, but I probably wasn't in the best place for communication at that time. But my sister then told me that my mum was put onto a DNAR. And for those that don't know what a DNAR is, it's a do not attempt resuscitation order, if you're not familiar with the acronym. Now, my mum has COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. So for anyone that doesn't know, that's a breathing disorder. She struggles with her breathing, and she has asthma. And I asked my mum who called her, and she said she didn't know who called her. I asked her if it was her doctor. No. I asked her if it was somebody from her surgery. No. I asked her if it was somebody from the local sort of community hospital. No. So they didn't really make it clear who they were calling from. So it seems to me like it was a general place. And they never took her through the form about talking to her family and what it actually meant. Now, at this point, I had found the do not attempt resuscitation form that was specifically for COVID, which I found alarming. And I'd met somebody online, as you know, David, we all started to meet, didn't we? People that were seeing what we were seeing. And I met a lady, and she was a nurse, and so she was in the NHS, and I asked her, would you go and find the DNAR policy for me? And she came back, and she was absolutely shocked. And she said, Victoria, she said, I never knew that DNARs can be placed on people without the patient's consent or family consent. They don't even need to know about it. And then what she said to me, she said it explains what I witnessed in the hospital, which was all the junior doctors, even on night shifts, doing do not attempt resuscitation orders on lots of people. She said, and ordinarily they would never have done that. They would have needed a doctor, a senior doctor, more qualified doctor to have signed it off, but they were happening left, right, and centre. Now, I found this form for the DNAR, and it said on it, if you get COVID, it is unlikely that you'll get respiratory care. If you get COVID, it's unlikely that you'll get hospital care. So I said to my mum, Mum, as someone who struggles with their respiration, and COVID was about respiration, wasn't it? I said, if you're refused care, what would that mean for you, Mum? She said, well, I would die. I said, you need to get off that form. She went to see her GP. The GP said he didn't understand why it had been put on her and that it wasn't for her and she needed to be taken off it. But more alarmingly is I put that form up on Facebook, and within minutes, not only was my Facebook post removed, the form disappeared off of the internet. And I started looking at DNAR and midazolam because of what Claire Harrison was saying about midazolam. And I know that people who listen to this, who may not have heard any of this, that it's pretty shocking. It's pretty unbelievable. I can assure you that I wished I was wrong. There was nothing more than I wished I was wrong about. So I started to look at midazolam and the fact that Matt Hancock had purchased 2 years' supply of midazolam before we even knew about COVID. And I found an article on the internet, I can't remember the website it was on, and it spoke of how midazolam was used on death row to restrict breath. That really upset me. When I shared that post, not only was my post removed, the document disappeared off of the internet. So now we know Matt Hancock had purchased 2 years' supply of midazolam. Claire Harrison, who was a solicitor, was taking whistleblowers' calls from care homes saying about the ways of the DNAR and that policy required midazolam. We also know, or some people might not know, that in 2020, there was a King's College Hospital study released that said that 61% of people were refused care because of forced do not attempt resuscitation orders. Now, none of this went out into mainstream media. And now there is a study that says that those people were euthanized. And that's a pretty awful thing. And I apologize, I never thought I was going to get upset. But that's a pretty horrific thing to get your head around, that this is what's happening. I was frantic at the time. I was going through a divorce, pretty toxic divorce. And my ex was very pro the vaccines. And I was pleading, I was frantic, desperate for everybody that I knew to be aware. But of course, I was emotional and therefore not in the best of communicative spaces. My brother had children in Canada and he wanted to see them. And I begged him not to take it. My sister said to me one day, you know, Ivan's taken the vaccine. What came out of me, David, I must have known intuitively, was primal, because I screamed like an animal in pain. My brother had a problem already with his urethra. And what I'm learning about these vaccines is that they're very clever, that they target your weakest points. So people just think that, oh, well, it's already what I had. So it's a continuation of it. He was running 100 miles a week. He had the AstraZeneca jab. The day that he took it, he had pains in his legs and he had pains in his head and he could no longer run. What he didn't share with us for a period of months was that he was getting repeated what he thought were infections, urinary tract infections. And the doctor refused to see him personally in my local town and kept putting him on antibiotics, but they did nothing. I never realized how unwell my brother was. My parents were away. He was staying at my mum's house, and he was very, very poorly. And I spoke to my mum, who was away, and she said, "You need to call the ambulance." Oh no, my parents were there, tell a lie. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics were brilliant. They were absolutely amazing. But I told them when they arrived that it was vaccine damage. My brother had sepsis, he had E. coli, he had gangrene of the scrotum, he had blood clots the size of anchovies pulled out of him. The top urologist in the world said he had an abscess at the top of his urethra that he's never seen before. And his genitalia swelled up like a watermelon, and he was facing amputation. He ended up in an Oxford hospital, and I went in there every day. And I thank the wonderful Simone Plout. I don't know if you know her. She's a naturopath, and she saved my brother's life. And through the guidance of her, I was taking everything into him to hospital: glutathione, liposomal vitamin C, serapeptase, nattokinase that dissolve blood clots, reduce congestion naturally, homeopathic remedies. I was taking it all into him. He was in hospital for several months. The doctors do not know how he's here. They said he should have been dead. He ended up as an outpatient in one of the top hospitals in London in 2022. And they told him that they were seeing rises in cancers in age groups they've never seen before, more aggressive. They told him that they were seeing other vaccine damages, and they weren't allowed to speak about it. Now, I cannot begin to imagine what it is like for these people in the medical world who have a family to support, like yourself, who have a mortgage to pay, like yourself, I don't know, and now find themselves in positions where their patients are coming in and they're seeing all of this damage, and they're not allowed to speak about it.
Mm.
Now, that tells me that there's something very evil going on. And anyone who's hearing this for the first time, I apologize. I never want to instill fear in anybody, but this is the ugly truth. And you are just one of the many people, one of the many medical professionals who I and my partner take our hat off to. We salute you, because Dr. Simone Gold in America, she was imprisoned for 6 months. You know, all of these doctors, Dr. Mike Eden, former chief scientific officer of Pfizer, look what's happened to him. Mohammed Adil, surgeon, cardiac surgeon, the moment he spoke out, his license was revoked within 24 hours. Professor Dolores Cahill, she said to the BBC, she's a well-renowned immunologist. She had her own lab. She's worked with the EU and the UN. I think she's the UN, so forgive me if that's wrong. I apologise, but she's worked at a very senior level. She said to the BBC, debate me, and if I'm wrong, you can take away all my awards. This is not a democratic society. This is not about health. And, there's a lot of people that have lost loved ones in that time on their own while governments parted. Now, I say to you, if it was the bubonic plague, they would not have been partying. You might not have known this, but as of the 19th of March, 2020, COVID-19 was off the high consequence infectious disease list because of low mortality rates. And if you go down to Westminster now and you look at the memorial wall with all the hearts on the wall for people who have died because of during this time, you'll notice that on the plaque, it's a very clever language. It said for people who died with COVID-19 on their death certificate, not of. And we have to pay very careful attention to the language, because that's where the deception is.
Mm.
So that's a whistle-stop tour of my journey in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, I mean, it really is hard hitting. It's the first time I've heard this, Victoria, so I'm obviously you know, feeling the impact of what you just said. There's a lot of stuff that we covered there. I mean, I experienced the preemptive DNARs in my own community. At the time where we couldn't see our families, we were, as GPs, being asked to go out to the elderly that lived alone or in nursing homes and do these blanket DNARs. Now, I didn't get involved in any of that because it was just unethical, but doctors were going out and knocking on people's doors and letting themselves in and putting DNARs. And part of that process was something called a TEP, treatment escalation plan. And again, without discussion with family, no assessment of capacity in the person that they were filing this on. They were basically playing God and saying, look, we're not going to escalate Doris's care if she becomes unwell with COVID, very similar to what you noticed with the DNARs. And at that time, then you could then, you know, not only were you limiting the ceiling of the treatment, if somebody who was 90 and got COVID wouldn't be transited to hospital, it'd be antibiotics and steroids and prayers. Then they were also getting this preemptive prescribing, just in case medicines, and this is where the midazolam and the diamorphine came into it. It was I've seen it with my own eyes, so I know this happened. And there's that mass dumping from hospitals, wasn't there, where, you know, all of these allegedly COVID positive patients were dumped out into nursing homes with DNARs, with the midazolam and the diamorphine prescribed ready
Yeah.
for the eventual deterioration. Can we go back to your brother's case? How is your brother now? Just I wanted to sort of touch on that.
He's he's um he's obviously a lot better, but he has been left injured.
Mm,
Um, and he's not done anything about it. He's not pursued it in any way because, he's got a life to live. He's busy trying to make ends meet. And so he's trying to find the time to do that. And it's probably a part of his life that he doesn't want to revisit.
mm,
I also meant to say that Mick lost his mother during that time as well. And she was a nurse and she went into hospital and she said to Mick, they keep moving me from ward to ward. They keep putting me on different wards. And
mm,
in the end, they put her on a COVID ward untested. And then within 2 days, she was gone because she went on to CPAP, midazolam. So Mick lost his mother as part of that protocol. And in fact, my mum was taken into hospital 2 years ago.
mm,
Because she has COPD, she has something called, you'll probably know this, she has something called a rescue pack at home,
mm,
which has her steroids and antibiotics in. And she got this bit of a cough, and she knew it was going to go to her chest, so she started administering her pack. And I noticed that my mum started to exhibit things that I'd never seen her before, which was panic attacks. She started to get very anxious, and her tongue was very, very dry. And so could you imagine if you're trying to now moisten your tongue and you can't breathe, the added challenge that brings to somebody and the fear that that creates. And of course, because I've become aware of side effects and how we normalize side effects now, I looked at her medication and everything that she was exhibiting was listed as side effects of the medication. And I told her, and she said, well, they've changed my medication and they haven't told me that they've changed it. Somebody came out and they said she got about 2 days left of the medication, said, no, she's okay, we'll continue with the medication. I wished I'd said no, take it back to what she was on before. But 2 days later, I was now staying over with her at the house because my dad was worried, my mum was scared. In the middle of the night, she couldn't breathe. And I was a bit fearful because I knew what was going on at the hospitals and it was the last place I wanted her to be, but it was her decision, not mine. I had to deal with my own stuff. So I asked her and she said, please please get me into hospital. So she was blue lighted into the hospital. I phoned ahead to the ER doctor and I explained that she was having an allergic reaction to the medication that she was on and that every reaction that she was having was listed as a side effect. And the doctor said, thank you for ringing ahead. And I said, and doctor, I said, please forgive me. I said, you might find this a bit of a strange thing for me to say. I said, but please don't put her onto a DNAR when she arrives. And he said, oh, no, 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 we don't do that. Not without patient's consent or family consent. And I said, doctor, you do. I said, the NHS does. Their own DNAR policy says they can, at which point the doctor hung up on me. When my mum arrived at the hospital, she's 76 years old at the time, unable to breathe. What would you think the first thing a consultant might say to her when she arrives at a hospital at 76 years old, unable to breathe? What do you think what would you say to her, David?
You manage your symptoms, don't you? Firstly, you reassure, and and treat the respiratory presenting complaint. But I'll bet you what you're going to tell me is that the red form was filled in post haste, as it were.
Well, the consultant said to her, Mrs. Austin, have you had the vaccine jab? You do realize COVID kills. Have your family been vaccinated? Not Mrs. Austin. We're going to get you, everything's going to be okay. Mick and I arrived at that hospital with my mother's legal power of attorney. We spoke to this doctor. We knew who he was. We knew that it was the doctor that had said to her, just intuitively. And Mick asked him about the PCR test. Doctor, do you know about this PCR test and who created it? And the doctor said, no. He said, in the military, he said, if I used a piece of equipment that I did not know about, he said, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically you wouldn't be involved in something that you didn't have an education of. So he explained to him about the PCR test. And I said to him, my mum's not to go on a COVID ward. And he said, she'll go where I put her. And that was his words. I said, I've got a legal power of attorney here. He said, your legal power of attorney means nothing. Now, even if these people believe in the PCR test, which they do, right? We know about the PCR test. We know it's not a diagnostics tool. We know it will find anything in anything based on what they did with the cycles. We know that. But even them believing in their own protocols, they put my mum on a COVID ward. Now she's got COPD and asthma, and they put her on a COVID ward. And she FaceTimed my dad, and they were intravenously delivering the very medication that I told them that she was having an allergic reaction to. And they literally then did a PCR test while my dad was FaceTiming her. They walked past her door and literally, like saying happy birthday, Mrs. Austin, your PCR test positive, you've got COVID. Now she's in a terrible distressed state at that moment in time. What do they think that's going to do to her? And what they said to her is they moved her onto a COVID ward. Oh, because before that, I told them to get her off the COVID ward, which they did. But then they tested her, which is the first step for the protocol. But I let them know I was all over them. I had the doctors down there questioning them. And I told them I knew what was going on. And they then told her she'd got Omicron tongue.
Omicron tongue.
That's what they told her. And it was the side effects of the medication. And anyway, she came out. I went to see her, went to collect her. They brought her down from the ward, masked up, a woman who can't breathe. She's got a mask on. And I said to the nurses, I said, what are you doing? I said, at what point are you going to use your common? She said, well, it's on a COVID ward. I said, precisely, it's a COVID ward. I said, do you not realize the virus is smaller than the size of that mask? And it goes in here and through here. If you can smell your perfume, the virus is through that mask. So what are you doing putting it on a woman who cannot breathe? And anyway, she came home and she settled down and she now realizes what was going on. It's woken my mum up a little bit
Mm.
to the events, yeah.
What was with this COVID tongue? It's the first one I've heard that. I mean, I've heard of COVID toe and COVID vagina and all the rest of it. But what's this COVID tongue?
Well,
It's
because
all encompassing, isn't it? COVID causes everything. I always comment on Twitter about, COVID spike protein is bad, but COVID spike protein made by the mRNA instruction manual gene therapy is good, and it can't possibly cause all the same things that COVID spike protein can.
come on, David. COVID was a healer, wasn't it? It cured flu, it cured pneumonia, it cured all those things that kind of disappeared through 2020 that a lot of people wouldn't think about because when you're in a state of fear, because I understand emotions, when you're in a state of fear or anxiety, there's no logic getting through to anybody. And also when you understand the governments, how you know how many conflicting messages they put out there with rules and different things. They know full well that if you give two conflicting messages, it creates confusion. It puts people into a hypnotic state and it makes them highly suggestible. They know that. And they paid, I think it was Warwick University, because I remember seeing it. They paid Warwick University for psychological study on how to influence different age groups. They paid for that.
Hmm. I mean, there was some pretty military grade psychological warfare going on, wasn't there? And doctors are susceptible to that. But now we've got a cohort. I think you touched on it earlier when you were acknowledging the sort of fear and the financial slavery that doctors are in, family commitments, etc. That I certainly wouldn't want to be a silent NHS whistleblower at the moment. The time to blow the whistle is now. It was 3 years ago, but yeah, the psychosis, the mass formation psychosis, the cognitive dissonance, I call it, ostrich syndrome. I just don't know what causes the doctors that you met with your mom. The aggressive nature of your power of attorney means nothing, and just generally that they've not had any communication skills, put it that way.
Well, they're
Um,
being paid as well, as you know, David. They're
mm,
paid to do that. You know, I've slowly kind of from a common sense perspective started to question our medical world, because if I had a leak in my house and they kept getting a pool of water in my living room coming up through or coming down from above, I wouldn't keep paying a plumber to come in and empty my water. I would say fix the leak.
mm,
And as you know, the medical world is based on treating symptoms, never treating the cause. And when you think about it, the whole medical model is based on people being ill. And why would they want people to be well? Because it would destroy their business model. And people go, I can't believe people wouldn't care for me. We only imagine what other people are like based on our own values. And there are plenty of people that don't care about us, least of all our governments, least of all these people whose values are just money, which is what this is. And who is it? Bill Gates actively said, wasn't he? We talk about this whole carbon dioxide thing. His equation is the biggest contributor to that is population. And he even said we only need to give them a few vaccines. But people hear that and think they don't. He said it in such a jovial way. People don't make the connections or even think there's any truth in it.
that's what he says about population. He says it was at COPSEC, wasn't it? He said, if we do a good job with vaccination, we can get population down by, I think he said
Yeah,
15%. But like you said, he threw it in. And it's a bit similar to most things. These sinister characters, they tell you what they're doing. They tell you
yeah,
in plain sight. And so, but you're right about the medical model. I mean, the degree is called medicine. So surprise, surprise, you churn out medicine cultists. And only recently, since my transition away from the NHS, have become aware of lots of natural things. And we're going to come on to that shortly about things that are just not taught in the medical curriculum. And it's a pill for every ill, and as we all know, a patient cured is a customer lost. But I can very much empathise with what you said about finding the root cause. And that's the sort of doctor I became in the NHS in the end, because you get 10 minutes deliberately, you get 10 minutes with your patient. That includes fetching them, bringing them in, take the coat off, sit them down, make your notes afterwards. It's deliberately set that you can't find the root cause.
and
So you'll
compare
you'll
that
throw an
to
antibiotic, or you'll throw a diazepam at somebody who's anxious, or an antidepressant who's somebody who's depressed clinically, and and it's set up to do that, and it's very medical driven, and then you get side effects. So there's a drug for that side effect. There's an
yeah,
interaction, so there's a drug to ameliorate that interaction, and so it's all very much built for the big pharma profit margins, and as we've seen, follow the money. I think is
yeah.
the pretty
And if
much
you
the recipe.
compare that to sort of 50 years ago, when we had doctors who would visit you in your home and they would actually listen to you as well as a patient, what do you think? They would ask you. It's a very different, and these changes happen so subtly that we're not even really aware that they happen until you do become aware. And then it's like, I mean, for me, it was like I walked around in this bubble of naivety.
Mm,
Well, that's what I say. It was this bubble of naivety, that I, bubble of ignorance and stupidity and lack of awareness. And 2020, it was like that bubble was popped well and truly. And of
mm,
course, you end up going down these rabbit holes and you get called a conspiracist, get called an anti-vaxxer. But what you realize is these labels are created to stop anybody listening to you, to
mm.
divide people. But as we know, what's the difference between a conspiracist and a reality? It's about 6 months. Everything that we, yeah,
Right.
everything we said was happening is happening.
Mm. It has been conspiracy theorist bingo, I call it. So you're just ticking them off as we go now in the last 6 months. But I do like that about the 6 month issue. What were you seeing? I mean, I know you had this horrible experience with your brother. Do you know around your sort of network of friends, family? I know a lot of us have all been sort of cast away from our families in this process, but what are you seeing in terms of the vaccination harms? Are you seeing real examples in your own friends and family circles, or
Um,
rumors?
well, my mum lost a friend very quickly. She was always told, because she smoked, that she was subject to, she possibly would get deep vein thrombosis. But it was really interesting because I can't remember if this happened before my brother or after, but very quickly after having the jab, she had to have her leg amputated. And then her leg wasn't healing properly. And then her leg got gangrene, same as my brother. And I'm hearing other people who have gangrene. And then they told her that there was something wrong with her blood and there was nothing that they could do about it. And she died in a care home alone, in the hospital alone. My mum and dad are seeing in my local church. There was a lady a few years ago told me her daughter had had a heart attack. And I asked her, had she been vaccinated? And she said yes, but she works in the NHS. She knows about these things. And I tried to point her to some things to show her, but she wasn't interested. And she's been telling my mum, have you had the vaccine? Have you had the vaccine? And my mum's like, no, I don't want to go near it. She's had it, the mother, and she's just had a stroke. It's another lady, and they still talk about it in this. We're seeing another member of family who I won't say who it was, but they took it and they've had a heart problem since. And another member of the family took it and he's not been able to play football since he had the AstraZeneca. He's not been right. There are actually lots of examples, and I can't bring them to mind. I wasn't expecting that question. But what my parents are noticing is everybody that's been jabbed are unwell. They're
And
unwell.
how about the unvaccinated cohort in comparison in your experience? Are there many of you, and how is your health faring?
Well, we're all fine. I don't mean to laugh at that. That's wrong of me to laugh.
Touch wood.
Yeah, touch wood, we're all fine. Um, and I think it's really important, David, that we never have this division of vaccinated versus unvaccinated because that's what they want.
Yeah.
I wrote a poem called Knowing about how hard it was to know what we knew. But it went on to talk about that there's no blame with these people because as much as we were upset and angry and wish they were aware because it would take us out of our own discomfort, it's really important to know, as you know, that we are with them. I, for one, would not want to have taken something and realized that it's now injured me or caused a death. I mean, you only have to go onto Facebook and put COVID vaccine injury. You'll find the groups, you'll find them. And in fact, there was a group of about 70,000 people of COVID injured people who'd not only maybe injured themselves, but had lost family members. That Facebook group was taken down. It was gone.
The group, yeah.
Yeah, so these are everywhere, and these people who are being gaslit, medically maltreated, it's just horrific. It really is horrific, and there's more and more. I mean, you have to ask yourself, David, how is it that we've got the excess deaths that we have now, with the biggest cause unknown? And there's rises in different age groups. How is it that this is a global trend? And I'm an analyst, so you look for correlations, right? So how is it that we've got this global trend and it started since the rollout of the vaccination?
And it's year on year increases. I think the Australian data came out for this quarter. And again, every year, quarter on quarter, the excess deaths getting higher and higher. And it's the elephant in the room that why can't anyone just cast away that ostrich syndrome just for 5 minutes? Just common sense, not even an analytical mind, and say what new came in 4 years ago when these worrying global trends started to happen. You see it in actuary work and insurance claims, etc., disability claimants. All of it follows the same principle as the excess deaths, but nobody wants to acknowledge the gene material laced with lipid nanoparticles that have never been used on humans ever before, or the monkey adenoviral vectors of the astronomical numbers of monkey adenoviral vectors put in a small amount of liquid to allow your human body to make this non-human spike protein.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been some information come out about the HPV vaccine. So for any parent out there now that's got a child and they're talking to you about the vaccine, first of all, you have to ask, why are boys being given that HPV vaccine? That doesn't make sense at all. But go and read the HPV vaccine on trial book that came out. It's a very, very toxic vaccine. And there's been an article that's come out now that's showing that it had DNA. I've just seen it, the Children's Health Defence There's been articles.
And we've seen that with the COVID jab, the contamination. Again, it should be front page news.
Yeah,
I've got a minutes of a meeting from MHRA handed to me that they knew this.
yeah,
And the takeaway points from this room filled with pharmaceutical executives and MHRA, June Rain et al., said we know there's contaminants. Now we know those contaminants in the COVID vaccine are E. coli plasmids, which have
yeah,
got certain sequences in them that have got prion motifs, have got oncogenic switches,
yeah.
SV40. How are we not screaming this from the rooftops? But again, you get a doctor in the room in 2025, they know what's going on. They're petrified to speak out and they don't understand the science. They don't.
No.
I've got the added benefit of a previous degree in immunology, virology, and understand some of the concepts. And natural immunity became a conspiracy theory overnight, didn't it? And
Yeah, it did.
the killer disease, one of the symptoms was there isn't a symptom. You have to test for it. There can't be much of a killer disease if you have to test to know you've got it. Do you see what I mean? These little
Oh, and
basic.
not only that, David, my daughter went to Spain with her dad, and he insisted that they did a PCR test. Now, if you do a test at home that actually you can just completely fabricate up yourself, there's no proof that you've even done a swab. You have to ask yourself, what was the severity of it? So anyway, my daughter did this PCR test. She had all the form. It took her all a while to fill out these forms that were needed to be able to go past passport control. And I asked her, I messaged her and I said, how did it go, darling? And she said, they never even asked me for it, mummy. And so you have to ask yourself, if it's such a killer disease, let me remind you, it was off the high consequence infectious disease list as of the 19th of March 2020.
They locked us down first time.
And they locked us down, that they're not asking you for the proof of that, something doesn't add up. And of course, I liken it to a jigsaw puzzle. There's many other things that we could talk about, David, but we'll stay on track. But if you've got the parts to a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the box, you've got no idea how they fit together or even what the big picture is. And COVID is just one piece of an unfolding jigsaw puzzle. But I do believe, David, I'm very spiritual, and I do believe that we have to shed light on this evil that's happening in humanity. Even the wars, the things that people think about the wars that are going on. War is about money, it's about contracts, it's about resources. And when you understand all of our governments, whether you're left wing or right wing, they belong to the same bird. They report to the World Economic Forum. They just deploy different strategies, create perceived enemies, but it's all part of it. It's all part of it. But I believe that this has to come to light because we cannot change what we're not aware of. And as hard as it is, because it is hard, as hard as it is, it will pave the way for a better world. I do believe big pharma will come down. I do believe that. But even if it's through lack of trust, because people won't go near them anymore. And my parents are hearing now other people say they're not going near these jabs. They are beginning to realize, well, I'm beginning to realize that you're well and I'm not. People are realizing it. I've got friends who, she's a year younger than me. She went to 5 funerals in the space of 3 months. And she said, I'm beginning to realize that these are the jabs damages. And I told her that. I said, I did say, Mel, and I don't like to say, but it's important that people were reminded that we said it because you can forget. And then, of course, if we hadn't put those sort of stakes in the ground back then and actually said, well, this is happening, because some people say, well, it could just be that it was rolled out so quickly and it is part of the, you learn. And I said, well, people could be forgiven for thinking that had I not seen the censored scientists that said about the mRNA gene therapy.
Hmm. And like you say, it's a lockstep censorship. Like you say, the algorithms had to have been built prior to it because as soon as I post anything on, I've been banned off the whole lot: YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram,
Oh,
Twitter.
LinkedIn as well. Wow. Okay.
LinkedIn was for an interview where I'm actually holding up documents from Pfizer and Moderna, running my finger along them, poking my head out the side here, and reading out the fact that their gene therapies, novel immunomodulatory gene therapies, will never be brought to the market in the UK or the world. This was 6 months before they rolled it out to the humans of society, and it was just a massive clinical trial.
One other thing, David, I think it's really important to say as well, just while I think about it. In Australia, they're looking to ban them, aren't they? Or they have banned them. For those that say, well, they've been fact checked, go and find out who owns the fact checkers.
Yeah.
I've looked up on Companies House. I've followed the money up all the way through the shareholders. I've looked up who owns the BBC, who owns the papers, who owns the radio stations, who owns our universities, who owns the private companies that support the NHS, who owns our utility companies, who owns our insurance companies, and they all go to BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the Rothschilds, and the Rockefellers. So your not so objective fact checkers are owned by the very same people pushing the vaccine.
Yeah. And
They
there's no surprises there, are they? Follow the money and it
know
goes straight
that.
up to those
Yeah,
aforementioned
yeah,
company interests, let's say.
yeah.
So we need a new way, as you mentioned, the Great Reset, but just not how they intended it to be. It's probably a good time to move on to your project and what you're doing now,
Yes,
and the results that you're getting. So
yeah.
what are you up to? Causing trouble for the NHS, or healing people?
Well, I'd like to bring Mick on actually, if I could. Um, in a moment, if when he's free, you can see he's in the middle of something at the moment. But I'd like to talk about his work first of all. Are you free to talk,
Yeah, I'm free.
Dominic? Would you like to come over? So Mick has just been awarded a doctorate. I'd like you to explain your work, darling, and then we'll talk about spooky.
Well, yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Mick. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Mick Stott. I'm served in the British Army for 30 years, held some pretty prestigious appointments, working with the Senior Master Army Physical Training Corps, and also held appointments at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. So really had a great handle on what was going on without pulling up the past. It's pretty obvious to me that it was a psyop. There's one indication of any psyop that is integral to any psyop is that when someone has to be silenced, you know there's something going on that's a psyop, and that's a simple military doctrine, really. But that aside, my work has involved a number of things, and of course, when all this kicked off, I created an organisation called the Guardians 300, and we must have trained directly and indirectly now way over 150,000 people to stand in common law and say no. But running alongside that, I specialise in mental health and created a system that is second to none for emotional transition. The work that I did in the military as an analyst simply set me up for designing something that was effective. And of course, we tried to get into some of the mainstream systems when we first started out. What we didn't realize was just how political that was. And that if you didn't wear the right tie or you weren't saying the right things, then generally you wouldn't be embraced. So we just got on with life and got on with what we were doing, never pushing on any closed doors, and just got into the world of making people better. I've never believed that PTSD is for life. I always believe that if we use our ingenuity to think outside of a box, and certainly if I'd have followed the modern psychological model, we would never have thought outside the box at all. We would have simply just recreated what was already out there. So I created something called Spectrum Transition Coaching. It gets phenomenal results very, very quickly. We run change programs. I train all of my own coaches and trainers. And because this is a biopsychosocial model, when I was out working with elite rugby, one of the biggest shouts was resilience, personal resilience, personal resilience. And so for me, the model is based on how well do you sleep? What do you do with your mind? What do you do with your body? What do you put into your body? So where Spectrum is fantastic is it's great at getting rid of the emotional stuff that influences your body and makes you less resilient. That's what it does really effectively. And more recently, I've just connected with frequency healing with a Spooky 2 system, which I know is already out there and is getting some great reviews. And I can see why. My shoulder froze a little while ago, and within a week of using Spooky 2, I have objectively and subjectively tested its efficacy, in so much that I went to see a craniosacral therapist because my shoulder was frozen, but I didn't tell her that I just used Spooky 2 to create some healing, and I had the machine running whilst she was working with me. Now, previously, she did a range of movement measurement with me in my shoulder. And the second time I went to her, the day before that, I just literally switched the machine on, and then I switched it on while I was seeing her, and she said, she's clearly connected because she put her hands on my shoulders and she said, oh, there's something really interesting happening with your shoulders. They feel like they're vibrating. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I didn't tell her what was going on at the level of spooky being connected to me. And she then said, and wow, look at your range of movement. It's improved dramatically. And that was just after one session of it. So that
For those who haven't heard, sorry, Mick, for those who haven't heard of what Spooky 2 is, what is the basics of layman's explanation?
The basics of Spooky 2 is that every disease, every illness, every presenting issue has a frequency that's connected to it. If you feed the same energy back to that frequency, the net result of that is that it gets rid of the disease, the bug, the parasite, or whatever presenting issue is present. It also works on a molecular level. So if, for instance, if you decide to put yourself in a field, a scalar field, which is a different type of energy, but Spooky 2 can create a scalar field of healing. And if you sit in between the transmitter and the receiver, whatever you put into that field will be picked up. Now, at the molecular level, you can put on the receiver end of this an oil, a chemical, or whatever it is you want to include in that field, and it will literally pick up the molecular structure of whatever you put on the receiver and place it in that scalar field. You also have the potential to use Rife energy. The birth of Rife energy was a guy who's termed Royal Rife. What he did was he invented the microscope, the electron microscope. He was the one that observed what happens if you present to a disease or an illness under the microscope the same frequency, and that's how we came to that conclusion. But the system has evolved since then to include molecular type work, to include scalar energy, to include Rife energy. There's no limits with Rife energy. It will cut through anything, steel, concrete, it will go through anything, and distance is no issue. So you can equally do this remotely. If you have a piece of somebody's DNA, then what you can do is you can use that on one of your remote systems, and you can send healing remotely via that piece of DNA, because the DNA is a transceiver. And of course, even though you have a piece of fingernail, at the level of entanglement theory with quantum physics and superposition, if anybody's ever read up on quantum physics, but it embraces that as a concept that allows that remote healing to happen. And of course, I've done this because I was interested in the remote stuff. That's what I used first with my shoulder. So there was no contact, but you can also, with Spooky, you can also use contact methods with plasma. There's a plasma system which has got absolutely enormous results with cancers and all sorts of different things. And because they're really up to date, there are detox programs for the jab. There are detox programs for pretty much every element of your body. And it works on the premise that you start small and you then sort of move forwards down the scale to work with larger organs or any parts of the body.
Bigger presenting issues.
Yeah, or bigger presenting issues. So that's a whistle stop 2. Now, Spooky 2 speaks for itself. The one thing that it's got in common with Spectrum is when I sat in front of 6 professors extolling the virtues of Spectrum, the one thing they couldn't argue with, David, was results. And of course, you know when you start to get a level of pushback, Spooky 2 got quite a significant level of pushback because they were making claims that they could cure COVID and they could heal this and heal that. Now, for me, I was always told when I went into the NHS by a very wise man. He said, you'll know how successful you are by the level of pushback you get from those within the mainstream system, the ones that can't think outside of the system. Now, of course, the answer to a problem doesn't lie in the problem. It lies in the solution. And I attended a meeting at Portcullis House, and it was a meeting of all the mental health professionals. I attended it as an analyst, and it was pretty much towards the end of my career in the military. I was with a good friend of mine, a guy called Simon Weston, who's well known for his burns during the Falklands War, but individually has probably made more money than any other person I know and given it to charity. hence his OBE and his knighthood. But essentially, we were sat there and we had all the professors from all over the UK. And I stood up and I said, look, I said, you know, without sounding a bit challenging, you've all admitted that what you're doing at the moment in mental health doesn't work. I said, so can I ask what you're all professors of? I said, because I know there are systems out there that do work that you won't engage with. Because NICE appears to be and became pretty much a self-licking lollipop. If you weren't involved in the club, if you didn't have the right conversation with the right person, that then excluded you from that system, which I always find to be unacceptable, because the world I grew up in, David, was extreme activity. So, for instance, I didn't need post-nominals to kayak a grade 6 river. I just sat my arse in a kayak and I got to the end of it and had a good chat with my mates, and nobody said, oh, right, okay, so where's your reward for doing that? Nobody cares, really. The bottom line is, it is about results. And of course, the arena we're in, it's about results, but with a very, very human element to it, because with what we do, there is no hierarchy.
No.
We don't put ourselves out there as any sort of expert or professional. Our job is to literally listen to what someone wants and then help them find it. And of course, whatever that may be within the arena of resilience. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour as to where we're going. We run change programs. We help anyone that's struggling with trauma, PTSD, or physical health issues. Now that's going to be another part of
ADHD is another one.
But ADHD, I mean, that's just all behavioral. That's just, I mean, that has got to be the biggest joke I have seen in a long time. You can see how this label is being put out for the purpose of making money. And for me, I'm more than happy to go onto any platform and argue the odds about ADHD and where it comes from, what drives it, and how it's a completely made up label. Happy to do that, and happy to challenge any professional on that. Because even if you look at the term ADHD, attention deficit, it's impossible to stop paying attention. It's impossible to have a deficit of attention. What you can have is a direction of attention, but you can't have a deficit. If I said to somebody, okay, stop paying attention right now, even when you're asleep, your unconscious is paying attention. Because if the room caught fire, I can guarantee you'd get up out of bed and do something about it. So for me, I'm more than happy to talk about anything like that, and also just to show you that when these people run out of labels, they have to create more labels. Yeah. Instead of going back to nature, instead of going back to the nature of something and looking at, well, you know, if I look at a learning environment, and ADHD has been so nurtured in learning environments, along with dyslexia. And I say there's no such thing as a poor learner. There's only a poor learning environment. But you see, the moment you give yourself post-nominals, the challenge is you become an expert, and then all of a sudden you become a legend in your own mind space. And that's the most dangerous relationship you can have with your ego. So you know, the great thing is when we see the likes of yourself, David, and Mike Yeadon and all these other guys speaking out, that's because they're in listening mode and they're prepared to learn. You know, I've met some great professors that have got open ears and that are prepared to learn. So we can't tar everyone with the same brush. But the problem is they never get chosen as the gatekeepers. It's the gatekeepers that we have to be very careful of.
I think it's worth saying as well, with this technology that we're exploring now, that combined with emotional healing, if anybody hasn't read the book by Dr. Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Beliefs, he's done these tests in a lab where when you change the environment of your cell, the cell improves in its quality. And what he means by the environment is the positive and negative emotions. So when we're filled with positivity, the quality of our cells improve. Now, a lot of people...
And we go into healing.
And we go into a healing state, yeah. Now, what Dr. Bruce Lipton doesn't have is he'll talk about practicing a behavior. Now, behaviors are 95% an unconscious response. And we can practice a new behavior for a short period of time, and then it becomes hard work.
We're all driven by emotion.
Yeah, because it's all driven by emotion. And so we've seen some phenomenal physical healing. A friend of mine had a brainstem bleed in 2020. She was 50 years old. She was having to relearn to walk. Significant emotional trauma in her family. And I said, your body is simply speaking your mind. She came on our program. Day 3, she walked. She couldn't. She was 3 months into the brainstem bleed. She was relearning to walk. She could walk about 30 yards with a stick, and that was it. Day 3, she walked 1.5 miles unaided. And that seems pretty miraculous. But, you know, Dr. Bruce Lipton has the science behind that. But we've seen so much. We've seen people let go of lifelong migraines, seizures, you know, people who've been in wheelchairs being able to get up and be able to walk again.
And there's no miracles there, but if you get rid of the cage you create emotionally that makes your world smaller, and trauma has a habit of doing that. If you look at the strategy the government deployed, it was to create fear, install fear and limitation, take you away from your social setting, which are all integral parts of any great psyop, create identity politics, pitch one man against the other to create smoke screens and things for us to focus on outside of the bigger plan. But if you look at Bruce Lipton's work, what's essential about it is that our body, when it's experiencing positivity, will go into healing quite quickly. If it's experiencing negativity, it will go into protection. And this is where illness and disease is generated.
It's what exposes the genetic propensity, isn't it?
And it can't be in both at the same time. So it's generally going to be in one or the other.
So I think the reason for me saying that is combine the emotional healing with the frequency healing.
Yep.
That for me is a very powerful and winning combination.
Yeah.
Because it kind of puts this, I don't know the technical terms or the scientific terms, but he talks about it like a sleeve that covers the genetic blueprint, that it actually puts the sleeve back over the genetic blueprint.
Well, we measured, I measured a lot of the work we did with, I was the performance lifestyle manager for Hong Kong international rugby, the elite 7s and 15s, men's and women's teams. And so I chose a couple of Welsh internationals, and one in particular. We did a whole sessions. We did a number of sessions of spectrum. He'd been diagnosed with depression. A lot of people think that because you play rugby at international level, there's nothing wrong with you mentally, and they couldn't be further from the truth. There were 2 suicides out there before I went out there. So I took the model out there for the purpose of exposing that and showing people how to deal with it. But what we would do is we would put a heart rate variable, we would put a heart rate monitor, clinical grade heart rate monitor on an athlete, and he would keep a diary for a week. And then what we would do, we would measure the heart rate variability. So that's the impact that we're having on the nervous system, to see how the nervous system was responding. Because I've always believed that if you have a heavy nervous system emotionally and it's negative stuff, then that's going to produce a set of behaviors, and it's going to produce a level of an uneasy system. So the heart rate variability, but when you look at something called first beat, you then literally, you can see throughout the week whether you are taking from your nervous system or whether you're actually, you're giving to your nervous system, whether you're nurturing it or whether you're actually taking from it. And of course, our lifestyle, when you look at alcohol and you look at all of these other things that we do, alcohol, drugs, or anything that steals from our nervous system, there's going to be a balance of your book at the end of a week. And we wanted athletes to be fully charged at the end of every week. So mindset work, meditation, and all of those types of things that invest in your nervous system were all then integrated into our lifestyle. So we measure the outcome of spectrum in some of those environments using heart rate variability. And all it really did for us, David, to be honest with you, was prove on an academic level what we already knew, just through the system of instruments that we use when we did some of the research.
So we're very excited about this new Spooky 2, aren't we?
Yeah, well, because the thing is that what I love about it is you can help people remotely. They don't have to be face to face, but I would say anything that's significant from what I'm reading is going to be face to face using plasma and using some of the other molecular systems. Yeah.
But again, I can tell you all of the enthralling stuff you've just shared. I mean, it's exciting to hear it, but secondly, it was absent from the medical school curriculum. for good reason, because that's a sponsored curriculum which turns you into a drug pimp essentially. So I mean, I was just going to ask you, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of results happening your end. There's a lot of, you know, evidence based to what you're doing. How does it affect? I mean, obviously, I don't know how public you are with what you, obviously you were doing a podcast now, but you know, have you had any come back on this because you're actually healing people? And
well, I got targeted when I created Guardians, David. So I got banned from driving when I was I got 6 ULEZ fines when I was actually in Manchester. They told me I was in London, and I can prove that I was in Manchester.
And they've doctored the photographs.
They've doctored, so somebody's fraudulently doctored those photographs. I got targeted and my license taken off me for no apparent reason.
Written up in the Guardian.
Written up, yeah. I was tracked by a guy called Ben Ryan.
Ben Ryan, yeah.
Ben Ryan, yeah. And they sent a boy on a man's errand. What they didn't realise was that my questioning skills are second to none. You know, when you've done what I've done linguistically and you work in the arena of trauma, your language has to be clean and clear, and you have to be a master of questions, which I am. And to be that humbly. So he didn't last 5 minutes on this interview because he came out with an agenda. And interestingly enough, I joined the Workers' Party for Britain because they're the only ones calling out the Zionist plan. This is a Zionist plan. And I don't mean to turn this into a political sort of element to it, but if you don't understand what a Zionist is, that they're a non-religious political beast that pretty much is part of that global network, you wouldn't get a handle on how they've managed to influence all of the governments and all of the organizations in every level. You only need to look at UK 100, which is the climate, which is a group of people that have access to councils and cabinet ministers, and they are usurping that decision-making process. And it's all part of the green, the climate crisis that they're trying to tell us that exists.
Yeah, I just want to go back to David's question about spooky. We've had it, what, a month? So we haven't had it very long, David. So we've been working with a few people that we know. So we haven't got extensive cases, and we'd be very happy to work with some people. We'd be very happy to do some of those things. I mean, there's lots, the testimonials are there about Spooky too from other people that have worked with it. And you've had experience of people that have used it as well. So, but we've just literally going into that arena because we know it's needed.
And it's not complicated, David. So you know, the thing is, it's as complicated as you want to make it, I suppose, or you want to read on it. The bottom line is, as long as you follow some of the basic safety protocols, which, you know, for me are pretty well laid out, the type of energy that they're talking about is really natural anyway. You can't overdose on it. It can't do you any harm, as long as you follow some of the basic protocols.
And the beauty of it is as well that we can deal with any emotional stuff that's presented, because every disease is supported by emotions.
Absolutely.
You know, one lady that we've just been helping, when she first came to us 6 months ago, she couldn't walk because of emotions, no other reason. She literally was just so overloaded with emotions. She really, really struggled to walk. But she's now, that was the reason why I was telling you about her. She's now able to walk and in a much better place. She's still got some things to resolve because you don't get fixed.
Look, the thing is, anyone that knows anything about the body would understand that you have a mind-body connection. This is not rocket science. Some people's body will speak their minds. They don't know that until they have an awareness, but the body will speak the mind. That's it. The body holds the score. And of course, the biggest driving force and the common denominators for someone struggling is always going to be a negative emotion, a limiting belief, like I'm not good enough, I'm not loved. There's going to be potentially some barriers that they put up when they were younger because of their life experiences. And there's going to be, and there's also going to be some conflicts. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Part of me wants to leave, part of me wants to stay, part of me wants to like it, but part of me doesn't like it. So those are the 4 common denominators for underperforming, irrespective of whether you are an average Joe or an elite athlete.
Or someone with a mental health diagnosis.
Or someone with an extreme mental health diagnosis. And you know, paradoxically, when I look at the research that we got from some of the most complex demographics, paradoxically, they were in such dark spaces that the moment they found their own love, the moment they found their own happiness, they came out of those spaces like as quickly as you just can't
As
believe.
opposed to somebody who'd got a few struggles.
As opposed to somebody that's in the world of entertainment.
Yeah,
Maybe I
yeah.
will change, maybe I won't change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's exciting, and you know, we'd be, you know, you spoke about, you said you've got lots of people that need it. You know, we're very happy to collaborate, David, and make
Where do people find you, Victoria? Where do people find you? Have you got a website or something?
Yeah, it's www. I mean, this Spooky 2 is not on there, by the way. This is our emotional stuff.
Yeah.
www.spectrum4change, that's FOR change.co.uk.
Yeah.
And if you've got our contact numbers anyway, David. So if anybody wants to speak to us,
Yeah.
you know, we are very open, very welcome, and you know, we look forward, David, to the collaboration with everybody. There's another guy we met at a conference, Tony. Can't remember his name. He's got a clinic.
Bioresonance.
North Oxford. He's got a bioresonance clinic, red light therapy clinic. He's been on his own journey and he's getting incredible results with different things. So, you know, I can also put you in touch with him.
Yeah, we believe in abundance. So as far as we're concerned, we're not interested in holding on to anything ourselves.
No.
We go into organizations, we train the organization, we want to create as many ripples as we can around abundance. And without gatekeepers, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know, you know, you've started this world, you've left your life, you've left your job, and I commend you, David. I mean, you are the kind of person that should be spearheading our healthcare.
Totally.
You know, someone with integrity.
Somebody with
the
a
Dr.
spine.
Doloreses, the Mohammed Adils of this world, the Dr. Simones of the world, the Mike Yeadens of this world, and and I apologize to every other medical professional that's out there that's spoken out, because there are loads of you, and I commend you. It's taken immense courage, immense bravery, immense moral compass to do what you've done, and you will be the new leaders. I know it in the deepest part of my soul that this will you will spearhead a new healthcare system. I mean, how can you put somebody in hospital who's got diabetes and feed them cake? I mean, look at the food quality that's in the NHS.
30 years in the British Army taught me something. If you really want to know who somebody is, watch what they do when nobody's watching. When there's nothing to be gained from something. Watch who they are when that's going on. Because power, money, and ego are a very, very subtle relationship. And the challenge that we have with our current batch of politicians is none of them have ever done anything that's actually tested themselves at the level of who they really are when they're put under pressure.
Yeah.
That is profound, actually. It's probably a good place to wind down. That was a really enthralling conversation. Like I say, we do these things unscripted. We don't know where we're going to go. I think that it's going to go down really well with the viewers. And thank you both really for your time and what we've discussed today. And keep up the good work. It sounds like, you know, it's what the pharmaceutical industry don't want to happen. You're healing people. I'm healing people. Just stay safe is all I'm going to say, because people like us tend to get targets on our head, as you've experienced, Mick, as you mentioned.
Well, it's not so good for business, but it's great for the soul.
Keep you on your toes. Guys, it's been amazing. Thank you for your time. And like I say, I'm sure lots of people are going to enjoy this conversation. So
yeah, and let's stay in touch, David.
Cheers, David.
Please do. Take care, both.
Take care. Bye-bye.